Good evening. Tonight we delve deep into three issues. Number one, internet piracy after the Wikipedia blackout, protests left and right, and Congress giving in. We still have to figure out how to keep the world from stealing movies and more online without inviting something worse. Big Brother. Issue number two, Planet White House. This time, solar energy. Would a Mitt or Newt administration darken solar's future, or is it really states like New York that make sun power possible? Then issue three, the English shortage. A new study says language lessons are in dangerously short supply for immigrants in New York. Can we expect people to climb the economic ladder if they don't know the lingo? First, piracy in cyberspace. If you tried to look anything up on Wikipedia last Wednesday, you were out of luck. The site, along with many others, shut down to protest anti-piracy legislation that Internet advocates said the proposed law cast far too wide a net. Rather than stop piracy, they argued it would lead to widespread web censorship. 7 million people signed a petition created by Google opposing the bill. It was so unpopular a bill that it got Republican presidential rivals Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney to agree on something. Here they are answering a question about the Stop Online Piracy Act, or SOPA, from moderator John King at the CNN debate last Thursday.
Well, you're asking a conservative about the economic interest of Hollywood. And I'm weighing it. I'm weighing it. I'm not rushing in. I'm trying to think through all of the many fond left-wing people who are so eager to protect. On the other hand, you have virtually everybody who's technologically advanced, including, Google and YouTube and Facebook and all the folks who say this is going to totally mess up the internet, and the bill in its current form is written really badly and leads to a range of censorship that is totally unacceptable. Well, I favor freedom. And I think that if I think that we have a patent office, we have copyright law. If a company finds that it has genuinely been infringed upon, it has the right to sue but the idea that we're going to preemptively have the government start censoring the internet on behalf of giant corporations' economic interest strikes me as exactly the wrong thing to do.
Mr. Speaker, right, Governor Romney, these companies complain, some of them are based in Hollywood, not all of them are, that their software, that their publishing, that their movies, that their shows are being ripped off.
I think he got it just about right.
Yes, Mitt Romney said he got it just about right. You won't hear that out of Mitt Romney's lips a lot these days regarding Newt Gingrich, so they agree. Now let's take a look at exactly what SOPA was about and where the issue stands now. Let's begin with a video primer. This is the argument against SOPA as made by a group called Fight for the Future.
Private corporations want the ability to shut down unauthorized sites where people download movies, TV shows, and music. Since most of these sites are outside U.S. jurisdiction, Protect IP uses a couple different tactics within American borders. Firstly, it gives the government the power to make U.S. internet providers block access to infringing domain names. They can also sue US-based search engines, directories, or even blogs and forums to have links to these sites removed. Secondly, Protect IP gives corporations and the government the ability to cut off funds to infringing websites by having US-based advertisers and payment services cancel those accounts. In a nutshell, that's what Protect IP will try to do. But in all likelihood, it'll do something else altogether. For starters, it won't stop downloaders. You'll still be able to access a blocked site just by entering its IP address instead of its name. What Protect IP will do is cripple new startups because it also lets companies sue any site they feel isn't doing their filtering well enough. These lawsuits could easily bankrupt new search engines and social media sites. And Protect IP's wording is ambiguous enough that important social media sites could become targets. Lots of trailblazing websites could look like piracy havens to the wrong judge. Tumblr, SoundCloud, and early YouTube, wherever people express themselves, make art, broadcast news, or organize protests, there's plenty of TV footage, movie clips, and copyrighted music mixed in.
The argument against SOPA and PIPA. Now the argument for the bills from the media company Viacom.
We're makers, not takers. We're not trying to take away anybody's First Amendment rights by protecting ours and our creative. We're not trying to stop people from using the internet. We're not trying to prevent free speech. We're just trying to protect our creative, what we made.
If you want this quality of content, we can't do it for free.
I think we're all worried. People who work in the industry are worried of the long-term effect of piracy on our jobs.
Content theft going unchecked is the digital equivalent of leaving the store's doors unlocked and letting people loot product.
It's like we're letting people take stuff away from us and not slapping them on the hand.
I think we expect our lawmakers to protect us.
You know, they talk about protecting Americans and American jobs. Well, here we are. We're asking for help, and, you know, they have the power to help us.
Our legal recourse is generally asking nicely, asking nicely, asking nicely, and it just doesn't help. The damage is done, and we, I think, need real, legitimate pathways to change.
So let's talk about internet piracy and what to do about it with Julian Sanchez, a fellow at the Cato Institute, who joins us now from Washington via Google+, and Declan McCullagh, the chief political correspondent for the tech site CNET, with us from San Francisco. Welcome to both of you. And Declan, I want to start here. Piracy is already illegal, so why do the advocates say we need a new law or set of laws to deal with it?
Right. Copyright infringement, as you said, has been illegal for a long time. And there's a 1998 U.S. federal law that adds even more teeth to U.S. copyright law. So what the Hollywood studios and other companies backing this would say is that, sure, we can go after U.S. sites. We can go after U.S. companies. But if it's overseas, if it's thepiratebay.org that's hosted in Europe, what are we going to do? We need a way to prevent Americans from going there. We need a great firewall of America to prevent them from visiting these sites. And this is why we need the Stop Online Piracy Act and to protect IP. Now, there's a debate about how far, what kind of a firewall should be erected. Maybe it involves DNS blocking. Maybe this won't be in the final version of the bill. Maybe there won't even be a bill at all. But that's the broad contours of the debate.
So, Julian, you're at the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank. I did notice in the debate last week, Ron Paul, libertarian, came down against SOPA and PIPA, saying it would restrict internet freedom. But I could see libertarians taking either side of this debate because libertarians are very pro-private property. And so you might hypothetically come down and say, well, I have my private property. I own it. You can't come and squat on my private property that I built with my own hands and call it sharing. So where do you come down?
Well, I'll say actually this is an issue where libertarians are often very divided. There's actually camps among the libertarian movement where there are both very, very strong maximalist intellectual property defenders, you know, would treat it almost like physical property, and then sort of IP abolitionists. I'm sort of in the middle. I'm a bit of a moderate on IP, but in this case, I don't think your views about IP are what determines your views on SOPA or PIPA. I mean, we believe in prosecuting, you know, thieves of physical property too, but we also believe in due process. We don't believe in summarily jailing people who are accused of theft.
So therefore, you come down against. I understand that one of the arguments is that this wouldn't have been effective anyway, Julian, in stopping internet piracy.
Yeah, I mean, any 12-year-old who is clever enough to install BitTorrent is certainly clever enough to click on a plugin to circumvent this kind of blocking, and maybe even clever enough to look up an IP address or edit their host file or use a proxy or any of about a half dozen other methods that anyone with a search engine can find pretty quickly.
So Declan, why do you think this caught fire the way it did and became such an internet firestorm? There are all kinds of bills that might either restrict or unrestrict the internet. This seems to have taken on a kind of mythic proportion and, you know, a real sense of national cause.
I think you're right. The background here is that for the last 10 plus years, Hollywood and its allies, including some, say, software companies, have suggested new expansions to copyright law. And generally, in 9 out of 10 cases, they get what they want, or they get something close to what they want. So they didn't see this coming. They didn't expect to have this outcry. And so they asked for a lot. They asked for everything on their wish list, and this time it went too far. It's not something that even the folks like Julian and me who follow this closely really saw coming. Maybe Julian did. He's maybe smarter about this than I am. But I didn't think this was going to blow up in their face as much as it did. Because remember, this passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Protect IP Act, that is, about half a year ago, unanimously, if I recall properly. I mean, there really wasn't a whole lot of dissent. And so what happened in the last few months? I think it was that people started really reading the text of these bills after the House version was introduced. That took fire or caught fire. That became more prominent, and that is what started to galvanize these responses. It wasn't just Google and Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. It was also, I mean, Wikipedia, which is not a company. It's the Wikimedia Foundation. It's a nonprofit group. Their users essentially voted to go dark last week. And so it was really a combination of a lot of things and the fact that the backers of the bill overreached.
So, Julian, why shouldn't we see this as a battle of the corporate titans rather than regular people and free speech versus Big Brother censorship? Because yes, Wikimedia is a nonprofit organization, but you had Google on the anti-SOPA side, you had Twitter on the anti-SOPA side. These are mega media corporations versus mega media corporations.
Right, and that's been, I think, the popular and to my mind a bit lazy frame a lot of people have jumped to, because normally on a niche issue like this, that would be the story. But I think just looking at the raw numbers, just the number of calls in, the number of petitions in. I mean, Google, for all its power and reach, cannot, put the Hypnotoad in their Google logo and hypnotize people to make them call their congressman. People phoned in because they were genuinely animated in a way that, no one would have been about copyright law or a copyright policy issue 5 or 10 years ago, because it used to be that unless you owned a CD pressing plant, the contours of copyright law just didn't have that much effect on you. And I think it's a recognition that on a network where everything you do is copying in some sense, these once very narrow in their effect regulations have the capacity to take down or chill out of existence important platforms that we all now see the value of.
Right, and so to take an example, I link to things through my Twitter feed all the time. That's a lot of what a lot of people do on Twitter. You're finding interesting articles, videos, pieces of information or entertainment, and you're tweeting links to them to tell your followers, your friends, your audience, whatever, that, hey, look, here's something cool. And in theory, under SOPA and PIPA, the federal government could shut down Twitter just because I linked to a piece of content that turns out to be pirated?
The unfortunate thing is actually they can do that already. SOPA and PIPA only affect foreign registered websites. That's not quite true. They impose a lot of obligations on domestic websites to filter out links to sites on the naughty list. But in terms of blocking or shutting off a site entirely, that is directed at non.com, .net, US registered sites. They can already shut down a site like Mega Upload, which they did last week, which is a .com registered in the US, under the Pro IP Act, which passed in 2008. Unfortunately, we didn't have the same kind of, I guess, online collective consciousness about the importance of copyright law.
But is it happening, Declan? Is this a kind of hysteria on the part of internet users because the government already has this power and they're not shutting down Twitter, they're not shutting down Facebook, they're not shutting down Google or Reddit or Wikipedia?
Well, I will say that not every single thing you've read online about SOPA and Protect IP has been accurate. I mean, there's been some exaggeration, intentional and unintentional on both sides. There's not every blog that described what the legislation would do was entirely accurate in every detail. But there's never before have we seen a federal law saying, well, we're just going to create this blacklist of off-limits websites. And these are largely overseas sites, but I think that your own website has a .tv extension. Well, guess what? That might be considered as an offshore overseas website. And as we see a lot more websites using these so-called country code top-level domains like .tv and .ly, Bitly, for instance, well, these are all country codes. TV is Tuvalu, right? So the number of sites that could be swept in is increasing. And also, the idea of a blacklist is something that we just haven't done before in the U.S. This is something that China has done. I'm not saying it's exactly equivalent, but there are only a few different ways to block stuff on the internet, and China has pioneered a lot of them.
And Julian, you've said that it's hysteria to be as concerned as the industry is, that is the entertainment industry, over piracy of movies and other content. But if that's true, I mean, it seems to me there are bootleg videos all the time. There are bootleg video sites. There are places where you can get around the copyright on television shows and download things for free that you'd have to pay for normally through, Hulu Premium or whatever. And yet I think your position is that it's a form of hysteria, the concern over piracy to the extent that there is. If it's hysteria, why is the motion picture industry, the television industry, the music industry so concerned about doing something about this?
Well, so let me say, I'm making the slightly more limited claim that if you look at the actual numbers that are thrown out, that under the slightest bit of scrutiny, it becomes clear that they are, vast exaggerations, if not outright fabrications. And the Government Accountability Office has said as much itself. It's not that it has no impact on those industries at all. It's just that the outrageous kind of claims they're making to try to defend a policy of using federal resources to assure those industry up are just demonstrably not correct. These are industries that are on the whole pretty healthy. You are seeing, especially in recorded music, declines in sales there that are largely offset, or substantially offset anyway, by rising concert revenues as people shift basically their entertainment budgets. That said, sure, they have reasons to be concerned, but I think there is more fear of the loss of control over distribution channels that has traditionally been the sort of power center of the major studios. I mean, we talk about studios, but really they're distributors. Their relationships with retailers, theaters, cable networks are a big source of their ability to control the market. And so I think there's a fear of that, of not knowing what the next business model looks like. But they've been, pretty good, very recently at least, in finding ways to deliver content online through Hulu, through Netflix, in ways that make piracy less attractive.
We're almost out of time, and I know the industry will come back around with new versions of SOPA and PIPA or things like it to try to do what they see as protecting themselves. But there was the one story on the very day after the blackout, Declan, last Thursday, where a site called Mega Upload was shut down for piracy. This is a widely used site. The teenagers in my life called me up and said, Mega Upload is shut down. So tell us the ramifications of that and how it relates to this.
Well, as you might know, and the teenagers can tell you, Mega Upload is used for both good and ill. If you just want to upload some files somewhere, maybe they're files that you own. Maybe you want to share them. And so it's not just a pirate site, although it probably is in large part that. But to answer your question, Mega Upload made a tactical error, and they maybe two errors. The first is that they were very public about who's behind it, so then they could be raided in New Zealand. It was and the second error they made was that they hosted their servers in the U.S. And so if they would have had megaupload.ch and hosted their servers in Switzerland, then the servers would probably still be up and running right now. The piratebay.org is based with its servers in Europe, and that's online. So I'm not sure if it's a great example, but it does show that if a site has a domain name inside the U.S. or its servers are hosted in the U.S., in this case Virginia, then the U.S. government does not need more laws to shut it down. It also shows that the feds can work in cooperation with international law enforcement, and copyright infringement is generally against the law everywhere. So the need for SOPA and Protect IP may not be quite as strong or as dramatic as what we've heard.
All right. Well, thank you both very much for joining us, Julian and Declan. Creative artists want protection. Internet users want freedom. This clash is not over. Thank you very much. Time for another edition of Planet White House, where we examine environmental issues in the presidential campaign. This week, solar power. The solar industry already employs about 100,000 people in 5,000 mostly small companies. Solar grew by more than 60% last year. It generates enough power for 500,000 homes. Still, solar would likely have been ignored by the presidential hopefuls were it not for a $535 million federal loan guarantee to a solar firm named Solyndra, which went belly up and was connected to people in the Obama administration. This prompted a House Oversight Subcommittee to place Energy Secretary Stephen Chu on the hot seat.
Investments in clean energy reached a record $243 billion last year. Solar photovoltaic systems alone represent a global market worth more than $80 billion a year today. In the coming decades, the clean energy sector is expected to grow by hundreds of billions of dollars. We're in a fierce global race to capture this market. In the past year and a half, the China Development Bank has offered more than $34 billion in credit lines to China's solar companies. China is not alone. To strengthen their country's competitiveness, governments around the world are providing strong support to their clean energy industries. Germany and Canada operate government-backed clean energy lending programs, and more than 50 countries offer some type of public financing for clean energy projects. In the United States, Congress established a Section 1703 and 1705 loan guarantee programs, as well as the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Program, all of which provide support to cutting-edge clean energy industries that involve technology and market risks. In so doing, Congress appropriated nearly $10 billion to cover potential losses in our total loan portfolio, thereby acknowledging the inherent risks of funding new and innovative technologies, and also ensuring that those risks are properly accounted for in the budget. We appreciate the support of the loan programs received from many members of Congress who have urged us to accelerate our efforts and to fund worthy projects in their states. In total, the Department received nearly 500 congressional letters about the loan programs. Through the loan programs, the Department of Energy is supporting 38 clean energy projects that are expected to employ more than 60,000 Americans, generate enough clean electricity to power 3 million homes, and displace more than 300 million gallons of gasoline annually. These important investments are helping to make America more competitive in the global clean energy economy.
Nobel Prize winner and Energy Secretary Stephen Chu. Whether the Solyndra investment was a reasonable risk or scandalous spending, the prospects for expanded federal funding for solar power have clearly dimmed. But are the feds really the key? Aren't the states critical to solar's future? And can solar grow with natural gas prices even cheaper than a Chinese solar panel? Joining us in the studio, Jackson Morris, a man who is celebrating Governor Cuomo's new commitment to solar. He's a senior policy advisor with the Albany office of the Pace Energy and Climate Center. And via Google+, Micah Gold-Markel and Yi Lee. Micah, who founded the startup Solar States, is based in Philadelphia. Yi Lee is president of the solar panel supplier Renogy. She's in New Orleans. Welcome to all of you from New Orleans, Philadelphia, and here in New York. Hello.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Micah, let me start with you. Tell us about your project and its relationship to government funding.
Yes, well, we have several solar projects going on right now, and they rely heavily on the Treasury Department's 1603 program. This program, up until 2012, gave solar developers 30% cash in lieu of a tax credit. And this was big, especially for startups. Folks like myself have very little tax liability, and getting 30% cash really makes a big difference in the project financials.
Did that end on December 31st as a result of political backlash from Solyndra?
It's hard to say whether it's a direct result of Solyndra or austerity budgets going on throughout the world. However, it did end. It is now just a 30% tax credit. It is no longer a cash grant.
So what happens to you and your solar buildings and plans to develop more solar buildings in Philadelphia?
It gets more complicated. Unfortunately, we have to bring in more people into the equation, folks who have large tax liabilities, who can use a 30% tax credit in order to help us finance these projects.
Yi Lee, he bought his solar panels from your company, I understand. So tell us in general, how's business? Where do you get solar panels from? And how do you make money on them?
Hi. So basically, we produce a solar panel in China, and sometimes we collaborate some other companies in Germany to provide some local sources as well. The business was pretty good, and especially with the expiration of the federal cash grant, and we have a surge demand of solar panels at the end of 2011. But we think the business is going to be slow because it's the expiration of the grant.
So why should the American taxpayer want to subsidize your business? People will say, in many cases, if solar is not ready to be profitable in the marketplace, like oil or some other sources of energy, why, and Jackson, let me bring you in and ask you this on, bring you in on this point. Why is this a good investment for the taxpayers when they can get their energy elsewhere, and for the most part, they don't care whether it comes from the sun or under the ground or whatever?
I mean, I think what we should start with is those traditional conventional sources of energy have been heavily subsidized for decades. And so that's an important piece of the puzzle, I think, that gets forgotten by the public generally, because that's happened so long ago, it's easy to forget. So those numbers are humongous, and actually dwarf all the national subsidies combined for renewables is a fraction of what fossil fuels receive still.
How far would you go with that? Because people might generally think, yeah, that's been true of the nuclear power industry, which the government definitely invested a lot in and invests a lot in to keep it afloat. But oil, natural gas, where companies are just chomping at the bit to get permission from the federal government to drill more at on their dime?
Right, and I would say if you trace it through the whole supply chain, particularly the coal industry, and you look at the cost of doing business and what the cost of doing business would be if they were regulated in a more appropriate manner, and that absolutely would make their form of energy more expensive. So I would say it is even with those considerations you just raised, it's a significant amount of taxpayer dollars going into the pockets of the fossil industry in 2012.
Micah, I know you wanted to jump in. We'll get to you in a minute. But Jackson, I want our viewers to know that just as the federal government is getting further out of this business, the state of New York, under Governor Cuomo, is ready to get further in.
Right. We just in the State of the State recently, we were extremely pleased to see Governor Cuomo announce his New York Sun Initiative. And that's kind of been the result, I think, of the governor in his campaign for office. He actually identified the need for New York State's policy to accelerate solar deployment. We've been a leader on renewables kind of generally. So we have a renewable portfolio standard which targets a 30% of our supply by 2015 will come from renewable sources generally. But solar has lagged far behind onshore wind and some other renewables to the point where last year we fell out of the top 10 states for solar in the nation. He's recognized that, and his announcement We're still awaiting some more details on it, but it's you know, this governor has a very high profile. He's a performance-driven government. He's demonstrated that in his first year of office. So having him highlight solar specifically in the state of the state sends a really strong message to the industry. Now we need to see the details and see how far he's going to go with that.
And I gather you personally have been leaning on Andrew Cuomo for some time on this.
Yeah, myself, but more importantly, a really broad coalition of, it's actually kind of a unique piece. We've got industry, both large and small, so some of the largest solar companies in the world. We've also got smaller solar businesses that have been cultivated in New York State. We've got environmental groups, and then also actually some of the largest organized labor in New York, including the AFL-CIO and some others. It's pretty unique to see all of those folks, and also some big businesses like GE, all coming together to say, we support moving a robust solar industry because of all the benefits that it drives. And so that's kind of, I think all of that's coming together to really drive and push some momentum in New York State.
Now, Micah, what were you trying to get in to say?
I was just trying to say a few months ago, the New York Times published an interesting piece about how solar is actually one of the few industries that is a net positive exporter for the United States. In fact, it's true that the panels are manufactured abroad most of the time. However, there are many components that go into a solar installation, one of them being inverters. And those are almost exclusively manufactured here in the United States. So in order to have a successful, thriving industry, you don't have to have 100% of the materials made in America. In fact, the vast majority of the materials in solar installs are made here in America, and it's beneficial to the American economy.
But Yi, I understand that China has been accused of dumping solar materials on the United States, driving up the price here, in effect, because China is selling it at a loss or at a very tiny profit in order to capture market share so that American companies can't compete. What's your understanding of that?
Based on my knowledge, I don't think Chinese manufacturers are dumping modules in. Every businessman, of course, want to make profits. The problem causing a lot of low-cost panels are currently in U.S. market. There's a few reasons. The first, I think, it's because the cost itself in China to make a panel is cheaper. It's not because of labor cost, which one of the reasons. It's also because it's concentrated PV area that can provide a lot of components to make the panel in a very quick and timely manner. So overall, the production cost is cheaper. Another reason for a lot of panels to be in the market, is because shrinking the demand, especially in Europe. And a lot of Chinese manufacturers expanded their capacity in 2011, almost double, triple their capacity because they overestimate the need in Europe. And because of global economic environment and also the Euro crisis, and the solar panel demand also shrink around 50%. So that's the reason a lot of panel and people want to sell the panels and get cash flow running, and the panels a little bit cheaper right now.
Micah, I understand you saw Yi's plant. Where was it? What did you see? What did you like?
Yes, it was a very impressive facility. It's based in Wuxi, China, which is about 2 hours east of Shanghai. I saw very good working conditions, workers who were engaged in what they were doing and being treated fairly. And it was very motivational. You hear so many stories as an American coming to China about poor labor conditions, poor pay, very long hours. And frankly, I didn't see any of that at this facility. That isn't to say it doesn't exist somewhere in China. It just wasn't the case at the plant that Yi is running.
Locally, Jackson, are New York and New Jersey now going in opposite directions? Because New Jersey has been the #2 state in America for solar installations on homes and businesses, because there's been a big state subsidy. So it becomes cost effective for the homeowners or the business owners. Governor Christie wants to do away with that because he says it's not a good use of tax dollars to subsidize one form of energy so heavily over another. So that seems to be on the way out the door in the Garden State. Governor Cuomo seems to want to get into the business? Is it going to be just that same kind of thing? There's going to be more of a rebate from the state or a tax credit for individual homeowners or business owners who install solar energy panels?
So there was a few questions in there. I'll try and take them one at a time. So first of all, I think that Governor Christie is a long way from successfully turning back the clock on the solar programs in New Jersey. You know, he's made rumblings of that nature, but I think even with his leanings right now, generally in that area, he can't deny the economic development, the job creation benefits. You've created this constituency that is real. It's not a projected job growth. It's not a projected dollar figure. It's real investment that's happening on the ground. And it's also, his own analysis of his state policy showed that even building up that fast and even some of the hiccups that program has had, it's had a fraction of a percent of an impact on the average homeowner's average electricity bill. So basically you just look at, I mean, backing up, why subsidize anything? Why does government support some industries and not others? It's because you do the analysis and the numbers show that this is a worthy investment. The cost benefit pans out. Environmental Economics 101, would we need subsidies if we had a real price on carbon? Would we need subsidies if the electricity markets weren't entrenched and designed to structure and support centralized generation? Probably not. So, I mean, you really have to look at the big picture and say, so what does government have to do in the absence of those broader fundamental changes to move solar forward? And that's why we need these programs. As far as where Governor Cuomo is headed now, again, we have to see the details of his proposal because, you know, it was an announcement in State of the State. We anxiously are awaiting the details. His budget proposal did include some tax credits to expand the state tax credit. We used to have a tax credit for small residential systems. We're now expanding that up to systems that are up to 2 megawatts, so your bigger size systems. But as far as whether that's going to establish a 15-year scalable longevity, certainty, the three principles industry needs to really move in full force and really invest, it kind of remains to be seen whether that'll be enough. But again, it certainly is a very, very positive step in the right direction.
And in the context of the presidential campaign, is it safe to say that this is one area in which we can assume President Obama and whoever his Republican opponent is are going to be very, very different in terms of the role of the federal government, or less than meets the eye?
I think it's a little early to tell. I think certainly if you're a Republican candidate, you're going to want to pull the Solyndra example out of your hat at certain times to raise. But I also think there's a lot more to the Solyndra story than a lot of the mainstream media has portrayed, including the fact that because solar is getting cheaper, which is a good thing, was the very reason that it became not so financially viable at the Solyndra project. So there's a lot of layers to the story, I think, that a lot of the mainstream media hasn't really conveyed to the public. And so it's been just easy to run with for opponents of renewable energy.
All right, you're going to stay for a minute. I want to thank Lee and Micah, who had joined us earlier. And let's add Adam Browning to the conversation. He's executive director of the Vote Solar Initiative in San Francisco. It works coast to coast to lift solar to a scale where renewable energy could light the country. Hello from New York. Thank you very much for joining us. Is California in the vanguard among the 50 states when it comes to solar energy?
It is, in fact. Thank you for having me on, talking to you from San Francisco. And yes, when it comes to clean energy, state-level policy is where leadership has traditionally happened. We've got a commitment to federalism when it comes to energy policy in general in this country. And California has, in fact, set the bar high.
Is California uniquely positioned?
Close to that. We say if your plan involves Congress, it's a bad plan. We just find that at the state level, you're much closer to democracy. One of the overwhelming positive things around renewables is that people really want it. We poll across the country on this, and solar and renewable energy in general consistently polls upwards of 80 to 90% of Americans want to see much greater investment in renewable energy.
So you've had this saying, if Congress is involved, don't do it, or it's a bad idea. Does the same pertain to the White House? Because I'm not sure Solyndra was as much a congressional initiative as a White House initiative, and of course the critics say it was because Solyndra donated to the Obama campaign.
I'm, aware of those aspersions and allegations. The interesting thing about Solyndra's story is that, inside of people that have been working in solar and renewable energy for a long time, like Solyndra was a company that was following a path that tons of other companies were doing at the same time, and had been invested in by a lot of different very smart VC firms for a long time. And the whole thing was entirely unremarkable until it went out of business, of course, and at which point it came to, unfortunately, define this effort, even though for those
right, and I understand
working
without
in this
getting
area,
into
it's
the
an outlier.
details of it that the market changed for the price of things and the cost of selling the things, and that was really what was beneath the Solyndra crash. But are you helping New York now, since you think this is a state-by-state battle?
Absolutely, very supportive of the leadership that's happening in New York. New York's a place where I think solar can, of the, I would say, 3 remaining states where you want to sit, where that are that have the best potential. New York is definitely amongst the 3.
And so, Jackson, we'll give you the last word here. Why New York? Because the typical New Yorker may be sitting here thinking, I know what California has that New York doesn't. A lot of sunshine.
I mean, you can just take a quick look at the NREL websites and look at the solar potential of New York, and it far exceeds the solar energy that you can get from Germany, which is the world beater in solar. It's a very significant solar resource. It's not maybe as much as Arizona, but it's absolutely viable and can generate a significant portion of New York's electricity needs if we have the appropriate program in place that has certainty, longevity, and scale. And until we have all 3 of those, New York won't quite be where it needs to be and where it should be. So we really look forward to seeing Governor Cuomo's proposal roll out, working with the legislature as well to see where New York can go in 2012.
All right, very informative. We'll see what happens at the state level here in New York, and we'll see what happens at the federal level and whether this becomes an explicit issue in the presidential campaign. Coming up next, not enough English classes for New York City immigrants.
When you throw away money on wasted electricity, you're throwing away everything you could have bought with it. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at energysavers.gov.
Well, I first started skating with my friend. He had an extra board, and then he just gave it to me, and I've been skating ever since. Well, when I don't land a trick and I have my mind set on something, and I'm not getting what I want, I just keep going for it until I get it right. My mom, she didn't go to college, so she wants me to experience that whole thing, and so I could end up getting like a good job. I think to get into college, I'll have to be determined, just like when I want to get a new trick, and skating's helped me realize I've got what it takes.
If you watched Governor Cuomo's State of the State address this month, you probably remember that it contained a salute to New York's immigrants.
This state has served so many purposes. We've been the gateway to immigration. While other states build walls to keep people out, we open our arms and we invite people in. We're not afraid of diversity. We celebrate diversity. We are a state of immigrants.
In fact, in recent years, the number of immigrants to New York State has been on the rise. From 2004 to 2009, the number of foreign-born residents of our state grew by almost 200,000. But there's a problem. There aren't nearly enough English for speakers of other languages, or ESOL, classes for all of these new arrivals. The New York City think tank Center for an Urban Future has released a report on the causes and consequences of the shortage of ESOL instruction and ways to address the problem. The author of the report, Center for an Urban Future Senior Fellow Tom Hillard, joins us now. Also with us is Susan McLean. She's the Executive Director of Literacy Partners, a nonprofit that provides free ESOL classes at locations around the city. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Tom, what did your report find?
Well, we found two trends going up and two trends going down. The number of immigrants in New York State is on the way up, as it has been for a number of years. And with that, the number of immigrants who speak English less than very well, as they say in the population surveys. People who need English proficiency instruction so that their full potential in the economy and the labor market as citizens, as small business owners would be fully utilized. We also found a tremendous improvement over the last several years in the quality of English language instruction. If you enter an English language course, you are more than 50% more likely now to progress at least one level in your classes. You're likely to stay in class longer. And the state has also introduced some very creative new strategies like literacy zones that maybe Susan can say more about.
And when you say stay in your class, you're not talking about high school, you're talking about post-high school, right?
That's right. We were looking at English language instructions for adults, not for children. And so that's a very important distinction because children will get instruction, whether it's English language instruction and other kinds of instruction, just by reporting for school. But there is no school to report to if you're 25 or 30 years old.
So Susan, are you seeing both of these trends reflected at Literacy Partners? First of all, that there's more demand for English as a second language programs?
Yes, we're seeing two things, that exactly what Tom mentioned. One is, yes, we are seeing more demand. We have calls every day. We have waiting lists. Our waiting lists are several months long at any period during the year. And our students are staying longer. In fact, our students are staying almost twice the amount they were staying 5 years ago. On the average, our students, which really exceed the report, are staying about 195 hours a year.
And why would the programs be getting more effective? Has something improved in the nature of the instruction, the way English is taught to immigrants, or is it just that those additional hours that people tend to be putting in?
Well, I think our instruction, our quality of education is really getting better in adult literacy programs, but of course second to that is that the students are spending more time with us, so they are making greater gains.
Do you find that students tend to be coming from particular immigrant countries? Is this surge among certain immigrants?
We are seeing more from East Africa in recent years. And the other interesting thing that we're seeing, just a little off the topic though, is those that are coming here really have less education than the immigrants who came to us, say, 10 or 15 years ago.
And at the same time, the state's investment in this is declining?
Right. So we're seeing two negative trends. One is a decline in availability. So our organization did a survey, a report called Lost in Translation in 2006, and we found at that time that there was availability of publicly funded English instruction for only 1 in 20 immigrants who lacked English proficiency. In our most recent study, it's fallen to 1 in 25. So we've gone from having very poor availability of publicly funded English language instruction to even worse. We're slipping backwards from a very bad state. And the other downward trend is in funding. The federal government has methodically reduced their support for English language instruction through Workforce Investment Act Title II, and the state has capped its funding for many years, for over 15 years. And as we all know, if you cap funding when the cost of goods and services goes up every year.
And the demand is going up with more immigrants.
Yes, exactly. Then that's going to result in funding cuts fewer resources for providers, and very long waiting lists.
What percentage of your budget at Literacy Partners comes from the government, state, federal, or whatever?
Right now, about just a little over 30%.
And how necessary is it? Some people might argue, in fact, an older generation of immigrants might argue, well, we came here, or my parents came here, and we didn't need the government to teach us English. We went to school as kids and we learned English and we brought it home and we taught our parents.
Well, in fact, actually my grandparents came here as immigrants and went to school in an adult literacy program on Grand Street. So adults have been doing this for many generations. And yes, it is important. And I think the one thing we forget about this is it's not just language, it's technology, it's management of the health system, it's negotiating the banking system and so on. It's not really as simple as one might think it's as just language acquisition.
Is there a political backlash against so many immigrants coming to New York that's causing this decrease or this freeze in funding at the state level, or is it not related to anti-immigrant sentiment?
I don't think so. I actually worked in Albany for several years, working with the state legislature and the governor, and in that time, I didn't see a backlash against immigrants. I think outside of New York City, policymakers, people in the legislature, and so on, often don't understand how important immigrants are to their economy. And what we found is that in many upstate communities, the immigrant surge is revitalizing these towns, from Schenectady to Buffalo and many other places. And in Erie County, the only population increase over the last several years has been in the immigrant population.
While states like Arizona and Alabama are trying to crack down on immigrants, cities like Schenectady are telling immigrants, please come here because GE left and you're going to revitalize our economy, because we see it happening in Brooklyn and Queens, right?
Right. That's right. So I don't really see evidence of a backlash. Underappreciation is far less toxic than a backlash. But I think that there's also a problem that goes back to the distinction that you were pointing out about children and adults, that children are much more sympathetic, and it is completely intuitive for a policymaker to say, let's put more funding into our K-12 system or into preschool. But we have to keep in mind that in the year 2030, more than half of the workforce in 2030 is already working now. So if we want to have a strong economy, a strong labor market 20 years from now, we have to be providing education and training to people who are already in the workforce.
When you said before that there's a tendency for less educated immigrants to be coming here these days, does that mean there's a literacy problem that underlies the language problem? If people aren't literate in their languages of origin, does it make it harder to learn English when they come here?
It does make it harder, because people that don't have say, a phonemic alphabet or an understanding of the relationship between the letter and the sounds and things like that, or have had no experience learning to read at all, it is harder. And I would add also that we are seeing people that are coming from cultures that have no written language. And that is something that we did not see 10 years ago.
What are some of those cultures?
Well, those are mostly the African cultures that we're seeing that are coming in. And we're seeing a big influx of that group in Harlem and in the Bronx. And for those groups, it does
East
take
African,
longer.
you said,
Yes.
in particular? So Kenya, Somalia, or what countries are you talking about?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm saying you're in West Africa.
West Africa.
West Africa, I'm sorry. But yes, we are. And I think it's really important because it's a big culture change as well. So,
is there something alarming about seeing more uneducated immigrants come to the United States? Is it not in the U.S.'s national interest to be moving in this direction? Don't we want more educated immigrants rather than less and less educated immigrants?
Well, I think we want to see more educated immigrants, and we are getting quite a few of those. And they also need English language instruction. But we have to keep in mind that New York City is the product of immigrants who came here with very little education. The Irish, the Italian immigrants, the Jewish immigrants, all of these groups were mostly uneducated, and they pulled themselves up not just by their own bootstraps, but with support from the city.
What solutions does your report recommend to this problem?
Well, I think the first and most important thing is that we've got to take English language instruction and adult literacy in general off of autopilot. We as a state have to assess what are our needs? What will it take to invest in the human capital of immigrants and others so that we'll be prepared for the economy? And that will probably require funding increases. It will involve overhauling the funding structure for the major funding source at the state level, a program called EPI. And it will really involve looking at who's getting the funding and why they're getting it.
Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week's show. We roll out a new episode Wednesday nights at 7:30, or see us anytime at CUNY.TV. And check out my daily radio show weekday mornings at 10 on WNYC. Tomorrow morning, Latino Republicans and the Florida primary. That's on 93.9 FM and AM 820 WNYC. Talk to you then.